Arno, during the discussion session this morning in G8, the question of monetisation came onto the table, which is particularly pertinent in the current climate. You made some comments with regard to the fact that you hear of clients now wanting cost off the table, as you put it, which I imagine rings bells with many of our members in Australia right now. What, in your opinion, are some of the key considerations that an SSO would need to actually make before they can even continue to go down a road such as that? What would be your advice to somebody who wants to consider it as an option?
I think the first thing they should be looking at is how much of what they deliver as a shared service to the organisation is actually contained within the shared services entity. Because what we have found through our own client interactions is there's a lot that is still being actually done out in the business units. So I think some initial drive, probably from the CFO, probably from the CEO, to say, right, let's actually capture the true cost picture of these functions across the organisations. Even though we thought we had captured them all in shared services, the reality we find with clients is they're not all being captured in shared services. So let's make sure we actually put our arms around the entire scope across the business units as well as the shared services entity. So that's the first step. When you then look at that, you say, right, have we got a bigger economies of scale? Can we therefore drive something initially out of that? Because we did have an initial shared services organisation that was driving it, and we can go through that process. And that's a fairly quick process, 6 to 9 months. If you've already done that, and if you don't see any cost out in the business units, then I think the only option to drive cost out of the business immediately is to go straight to the outsourcing path. Get straight on that bandwagon. There's plenty of organisations, particularly in this climate where all the service providers are challenged in growing their businesses, they would love to hear from you.
And Arno, another comment that you made, which I think we'd like to expand on further, was certainly around a situation in the US at the moment with the Obama administration, essentially supporting the failure of some industries and businesses within those industries, more particularly, namely the motoring industry. Comments were made around the fact that it's not about protecting people but protecting jobs. And I'd like you to expand a little bit on your view of the Australian market in comparison to those comments.
I think it's been very shameful that we've allowed organisations, and I include the public sector in this, to actually grow to an extent where the inefficiencies have become hidden while the market has been very buoyant. The market is not buoyant now, so some home truths have come to bear. And if you talk about the automotive industry and even other industries, including IT and shared services as they get played out within clients, all of those home truths have come forward, and we need to address those. Some organisations or shared services are beyond repair, and the analogy is we're better off demolishing this house and building it from scratch, as opposed to trying to continue to repair the gutters, the leaky faucets, the holes in the floorboards, etc., etc. You just can't do it. And so I think you need to let those things go past. It's unfortunate, people will be affected by it, but it'll actually strengthen and provide sustainability in the economy that wasn't there before.
You made a comment as well about leadership during difficult times and your hope that stronger leadership may emerge within the Australian market at an executive level, following suit to other areas in the world. Do you think that this is likely to happen? Do you think that the Australian breed of CEO may change in the coming years in light of the current climate?
No, I don't believe so. I think what's happened here in Australia is it's a risk-adverse nation. We're very isolated. In a way, we've almost created a level of protectionism around ourselves. And the CEOs, because of the oligopoly nature of many of the industry market segments, have been happy to maintain current market share and have always looked for the government for general support to sustain their type of industry. Occasionally, a particular client organisation has failed, Ansett as an airline, for example, but that's been far and few between. So it's a little happy, we're kind of fat, dumb and happy in a number of these oligopolies, and that's unfortunate because there isn't the incentive then to actually make some sustainable change. So I think the banks will continue to enjoy great profitability, as will the telcos, as will a couple of the airlines, because that's all we have, as will the retailers. And that's unfortunate. There should be more competition, but we're only a nation of 21.5 million people. We can't expect too much from that. So let's try and adjust our thinking around that in terms of what we do expect from our CEOs and our leadership. So on. Yep.
And just finally, Arno, a question drawing upon your experience outside of the Australian market. There have been questions raised as to how mature the Australian market is in comparison to the rest of Asia Pacific and the rest of the world, and that longevity of shared services that have operated within this region may not necessarily be a yardstick of how mature and sophisticated those processes are after that length of time. What would be your comment on that, comparing this space with the rest of your global clients?
I think here in Australia we have a few small examples of some excellence in shared services, but they are small and they are contained and they're not sustainable across the whole of the marketplace. If you compare what's happened globally, we see the big organisations who have got global facilities who have created separate units outside of the corporate centre, and they've been able to create best practice around that. We don't have the scale to do that, other than maybe one or two resource companies like a BHP, like a Rio Tinto, etc., who are global in their own right. So the shared services always become part of the corporate centre, and it's the corporate centre telling the business units what to do. That's not how best practice shared services takes place across the globe, and that's one of the limitations that the Australian marketplace will always have with shared services. We'll get some small pockets of excellence, but generally the maturity across the whole of the marketplace does not compare with some of the larger corporations and some of the other economies around the globe.
In light of that then, what advice can you give to organisations in Australia who recognise they simply don't have that scale, but they would very much like to take as many of the principles that are being used inside global organisations and transfer as much as they can to gain as much success as possible?
Well, it comes back to this leadership issue. Be bold and go forth with third-party arrangements. Tap into what India has to offer as the premier place for back office operations. Tap into some of those other locations that are around the globe and actually go straight to the third-party arrangements. Don't persist with the shared services, which is a difficult, hard journey to undertake with inside your organisation. Use the third-party service provider as your default change agent inside your organisation, and skip that intermediate step of shared services and grow straight to the third party.